next up is Harish, who is an open source activist, and he has been involved in Software Freedom Day. He is now here to talk to us how to get your networking up and going when you're in a disaster situation. When the haze has hit so bad we can't do anything, how to restart society and communicate. So let's give a warm welcome. Your screen is not...
Yeah, I know.
Good.
I need audio for Michael. Audio jack. No audio jack here? Never mind, I can put a mic there then. All right. Good morning, everybody. And I think the first two speakers did cover very interesting stuff, especially I like the beta.data.gov.sg. I think that would in some ways hopefully make some stuff I'm talking about useful as well. So I don't know, we'll see. Caveat here, I did present this talk at the FOSSAsia earlier this year. How many of you were there? Okay, so I guess then it's a new crowd. So that's fine. So my name is Harish. I am going to be talking about this thing called the Secure E7y Nomadic Toolkit. You'll figure out what E7y is shortly. So what is that? That's not what you see outside. That's not the PSI. Well, if it hurts. So what are we going to be talking about today? What is it that we are trying to do? I am trying to figure out, at the end of the day, how do I create a secure network? Now, E7y here stands for emergency. Okay, so this is one of the things I found out is if you search for E7y, it gets automatically transcribed to ENY, which is Ernst & Young. So Google somehow changes the E7 because 7 and ampersand are just above on the same key, so they thought you pressed the wrong key. So the intention here is to create a new meme, like internationalization, I18N, and localization, and so on, L10N, so E7y. The objective is this. Some of the things that we take for granted today, I'm not connected through the Wi-Fi in this hall. I'm connected through my handphone's hotspot because I can't seem to connect to this one here. I'm not sure whether there is access to it. But that is such a fundamentally important thing for all of us today, that if we don't have connectivity, we have a problem. Now, I'd like to just, for you to listen to this. This may be a bit tricky, so let me see if I can get the audio here.
As we now must have, with a curriculum. Once we have outlets, computer outlets in every home, each of them hooked up to enormous libraries where anyone can ask any question and be given answers, be given reference material, be something you're interested in knowing. From an early age, however silly it might seem to someone else, that's what you're interested in. And you ask, and you can find out, and you can follow it up. And you can do it in your own home, at your own speed, in your own direction, in your own time. Then everyone will enjoy learning. Nowadays, what people call learning is forced on you, and everyone is forced to learn the same thing on the same day at the same speed in class. And everyone is different. For some it goes too fast, for some too slow, for some in the wrong direction. But give them a chance, in addition to school, I don't say we abolish school, but in addition to school, to follow up their own bent from the start.
Well, I love the vision, but what about the argument that machines, computers, dehumanize learning?
Well, as a matter of fact, it's just the reverse. It seems to me that it's through this machine that for the first time we'll be able to have a one-to-one relationship between information source and information consumer, so to speak. Well, in the old days, you used to have tutors for children. A person who could afford it would hire a pedagogue, a tutor, and he would teach the children, and if he knew his job, he could adapt his teaching to the tastes and abilities of the students, you see. But how many people could afford to hire a pedagogue? Most children went uneducated. Then we reached the point where it's absolutely necessary to educate everybody. But the only way we could do it is to have one teacher for a great many of students, and in order to organize the situation properly, we gave them a curriculum to teach from. So how many teachers are good at this too? Like in everything else, the number of teachers is far greater than the number of good teachers. So we either have a one-to-one relationship for the very few or a one-to-many relationship for the many. Now there's a possibility of a one-to-one relationship for the many. Everyone can have a teacher in the form of access to the gathered knowledge of the human species.
So that was Isaac Asimov, right? Isn't it amazing? That's what he's talking about MOOCs, for example. But in order for all of those things to actually succeed, you need connectivity. Yep.
When was that?
In 1968. Okay, so I mean, he is a science fiction writer, right? So clearly, he's way ahead of all of us, right? Way ahead of us. And that's when I saw that, it's like, wow, you know, he's just prescient. He just knew exactly what it was. So when you look at it from that perspective, what we really need is connectivity. We need the internet, really, what it is, right? As you can see, I'm wearing an Internet Society t-shirt here, so I'm plugging for the Internet Society here today. So let me just move a little bit further and look at what the Internet Society thinks it will be 20 years from now.
Ever wonder what the internet will be like 20 years from now? Imagine the possibilities. Could you have imagined 20 years ago how people use the internet today? 20 years ago, before the World Wide Web and instant messaging, before Google or Facebook, or YouTube or Skype or Twitter, or any one of the thousands of other applications and services we depend on today. What started as a research project amongst a handful of scientists is now a global infrastructure, at the core of how we work, how we learn, how we live. The internet today connects more than 1.5 billion people. Families use it to stay in touch, students use it to learn, and neighbors use it to connect with communities. Organizations use it to bring people together, and companies from nearly every industry across every continent use the internet to connect with customers and to coordinate operations. Since the beginning, the internet has brought on an amazing explosion of innovation, collaboration, and economic growth. And it's not by accident. The internet's growth has been guided by a few simple principles. Open technical standards, shared processes for technology and policy development, and transparent and collaborative governance. Even as technology has changed and its reach has grown, the internet has thrived because the people who build and manage it have remained committed to these principles. The internet empowers people. So what about 20 years from now? In what ways will we use the internet then? That depends on the actions we take today and how we face the rising challenges and embrace the emerging opportunities. Together, we can ensure the internet continues to empower its users to imagine and realize new possibilities. The Internet Society brings together tens of thousands of individuals, like you, through chapters in more than 70 countries and hundreds of businesses, governments, and other organizations around the world, all committed to keeping the internet open, shared, and transparent. The Global Internet Society is a community that tackles issues at the intersection of technology, policy, and education that are key to the internet's continued success. You can be part of making sure the internet continues to promote technical innovation, social equality, and economic development. Join the Internet Society today.
All right, so that was a pitch for the Internet Society, but more importantly, this is what it could have been.
Shopping will be one of the many homemakers' conveniences. This video console will be channeled into the store of her choice. There, a camera will scan a display of wares, which she will select by push button. Another part of this console is a household monitor screen, which maintains a watch on critical areas in the house, swimming pool, or yard. What the wife selects on her console will be paid for by the husband at his counterpart console. All bills and transactions will be carried out electronically. A central bank computer will debit the family's account the amount of purchases and credit the department store, for example, informing the family's home computer at the same time. Father, at the touch of a button, receives an instantaneous printed copy of his budget, the amount of taxes he owes, the payments left on the car, and so forth. All documents and household records are available on the video screen for immediate reference. Also at his disposal is an electronic correspondence machine, or home post office, which allows for instant written communication between individuals anywhere in the world. To maintain these and hundreds of complex electronic circuits, a monitor checks all circuits every few seconds, inserts a backup circuit if and when trouble develops, and alerts the communal service agency for replacement.
Isn't it good that that didn't happen that way? Imagine you have this one monitor for your catalog, another monitor to get your bill in, and a printer, and then you go to another to sign your payment authorization. Maybe we do that all in one now, but at least it's not quite that way, which is actually quite fascinating when you think about it. So at the end of the day, it's all about communication. Can I communicate well, right? Yeah. Thank you. So, would you agree with this? Can I put you in a room by yourself for hours on end and with no means to communicate with anybody?
Can I bring a book?
No book.
Meditate.
Well, if you want to meditate, that's up to you.
Pen and paper.
No pen and paper. What do you think? Do you think you can handle that? We are beasts of communication. We really cannot handle an incommunicado state. That's why some religious organizations use incommunicado as the means to banish somebody. Put you in incommunicado, you can't talk to anybody. That's the punishment. It's actually very painful. You should try it for yourself, for fun. Maybe you should have a Geek Camp 1 hour incommunicado session, right? Maybe we should. See how it feels, then you know why you need communication. So, what we need to do is therefore build a robust communication system. We think we have. Do you think you have one? Do you think the communication system you have now is robust enough? Okay. So, there is a law called Postel's law. Anybody know who Postel is? John Postel? Only one person? John Postel was the guy who, those in the early days, where if you needed to get a domain registered, you send a note to John, and he would register the domain for you. That was it. Okay, or you want an IP number, send a note to him, he gives you an IP number. So among many things, he was IANA. IANA was him, and he was IANA. That was it. That was his job. That was all he did. But among other things he also did was to recognize there's a lot of things that happens in technology, especially this thing called the internet, that we need to figure out how best to engage with. And one of the things he came out was this notion that on the internet, you should be conservative in what you do, but be very liberal in what you accept from others. So in other words, the way technology should work is when you provide something to somebody, make sure you comply within a certain fixed parameter that is probably a standards-based parameter or a set ways of doing things that is common to everybody. But you should be willing to accept any format that's thrown at you. So this morning's talk when Vivian and Hongi talked about the data formats sitting on data.gov.sg. It's a huge problem because there's a lot of PDFs and Excel spreadsheets and what have you. That's the wrong model. But we should be able to accept that and figure out what we need to do. So we should be able to accept anything, but when we put something out, make sure you put it out in a format that everybody else can consume in a least friction, as very low friction as possible. And that's his principle behind that. And there's another gentleman by Eric Allman. He actually expanded on it, which needs to be refined a little bit. He says, don't accept everything. Have some constraints. Don't just accept spreadsheets, for example, as formats. Accept CSVs. So you now be a little bit selective on what you are indiscriminate about, but just be selective about it. And anybody know who Eric Allman is? Nobody? He's a guy who wrote SendMail. Okay, Okay, so Eric Allman. So now it rings a bell, right? So you read up his document on ACM, which is actually very interesting because he understands what John is talking about in terms of what needs to be done from accepting of data and contents perspective, but at the same time, you don't want to make it so wide that, you know, if something very bizarre is thrown at you, you are now stuck. It should have some form of discrimination, say, okay, I kind of accept this range of potential data sources. But that's what he is saying. So let's move on to something else that I'm more interested in. What was the motivation for communication? There were a bunch of people, the pioneers of this space. When everything is down,
we've got traffic. We need medical assistance here. We have 3 injured people. This is a test. 1 with a head trauma and 2 minor injuries.
Run to the nearest police department or something. Try and flag some cop on the road down. I have no idea.
Smoke signals.
I would get on Wi-Fi and email to someone.
So everything is down.
Pretty much.
Smoke signals.
Smoke signals?
Mm-hmm. Or
flare would be good.
I mean, yeah, okay. Flare.
If we're talking smoke signals. Yell really loud.
Start burning everything. Then they'll see the smoke, and they will come flying.
Well, I would probably, I don't know, just maybe run to where they were at, or if that wasn't possible, maybe just yell for help or something.
Well, if there's no phones and you can't really do anything, I'd probably scream and yell for someone. I got big lungs. Depends on how close they are. Maybe like run and go get them. Tell people, just make a phone line. Telephone, you know, pass it on.
For sure.
Yeah, if it could benefit me in an emergency, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would, just because if that's the only thing that was working, yeah, I definitely would.
That would be awesome.
Oh, I most definitely would.
Well, yeah, if it wasn't like $1 million, of course I'd buy it. Oh, yeah.
I've just heard of it. I don't know what it is.
No.
No, what's ham radio?
Yeah, I have. The guy that I lived by in my hometown has it. I know that you have to have like a really big antenna, and like you can access like way far away than regular, just like a hand radio. It's like broadcasted further.
Yeah, well, you don't necessarily have to have a big antenna.
Okay, well, he has a big antenna, so.
Nope.
Kinda not really. Like, I've heard it before, but I don't know what it is.
I've heard of it in Scouts, but I haven't really done anything with it.
No.
So you don't know anything about it?
No. No, I have not.
We were used to pass information, health and welfare, be the eyes and the ears for the police departments.
Johnson, or N7DND to his friends, was at home in Bountiful when he got the call from the Davis County Sheriff yesterday morning. Communications were breaking down because of all the commotion, and the sheriff was wondering if some ham radio operators could help get messages through to emergency personnel. Within no time, Johnson had 18 volunteers who were staffed at cities throughout Davis County.
To have those ham radio operators on call, and even in our radio room, was a tremendous asset for us. The radio system was saturated. We were at a maximum.
The lines were so maxed out, sometimes dispatchers couldn't respond to police right away.
It is very scary for the dispatchers to push the button and not be able to talk for 3 minutes.
Which is why ham radio operators were called in to keep communications going. For Johnson, it was an all-day job, but one that kept him smiling every single minute of it. He knew his team made a difference.
So, you saw that. That's one of the motivations behind ham radio. Let me just mention one more thing here.
Welcome back. So far in this show, we've seen some pretty advanced technology that could take off in the future. But in many parts of the world, it's the small things that make a difference. When the tsunami struck South Asia in December, it quickly became apparent that the region was ill-equipped to deal with a disaster of this scale. But basic technologies in small pockets of the ravaged areas suddenly became lifesavers.
This was the day the earth shook and a series of cascading waves unleashed a fury that had never been seen before. Among the territories closest to the epicenter of that great earthquake were the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, an Indian outpost thousands of kilometers from the mainland. And by sheer coincidence, even as the waves of water crashed onto land, the airwaves were filled with the sound of amateur radio operators, or hams, transmitting distress calls and passing on critical information from the disaster zone.
Very rough copy right now. I'll try you later. I'll try later when conditions change. HS0.
These are the actual audio recordings of the radio operators at work.
So let me just move on a little bit. How many of you have heard of amateur radio or ham radio? How many of you have a license in Singapore? Well, okay. How many of you have a ham radio license? All right. So what's your call sign?
AG6W.
Do you have a Singapore license yet? You have a Singapore license? 9V1? No? Oh, there you go. 9V. I'm 9V1 HP. You are?
I have an Australian license, but I've got a 9V1 license.
All right. So 9V1 is the Singapore the prefix for Singapore ham radio operators. So that's a great way to start and understand how to handle communication. I think we have a talk later on about, you're going to talk something about it, right?
Big next about.
Yeah, right. So I'm not going to talk much on, don't want to steal your thunder there. So the scenario here is we have to figure out how you're going to be managing when the internet is down. That's the scenario. Ideal case is I would like to turn this entire hall into a Faraday cage, which means none of you can talk to anybody outside, and vice versa, which means you are on your own. You have to figure out and build your own internet with what you have. So that's the objective of this talk, really, is to try and figure out how we can make it happen. So I want to build a solution. The solution has to be what I call a minimum viable internet. Okay, we can build many types of internet. Your definition of internet may differ from mine. But what I would like to do is to have a benchmark of what it means to have a minimum viable internet. So what do we need? Now this is a laundry list of stuff that I think it's fair enough to assume that we have in this room. I assume we have laptops. I assume that the laptops have some form of a Wi-Fi or Bluetooth connectivity, right? There must be some software in there that could use those connectivity solutions. Whether it is proprietary or not, ideally it should be an open source software. Why? Because I may need to fix it. It may be a requirement that I need to switch the frequency to something else that is not what I need for now, right? But if I have the access to the code, I can go fix it. I may need some wiring tools. Scissors are fine. We are in an emergency situation right now, right? We may need antennas, but if it is a small enough room, maybe not so critical. But we still need something. We also need power systems. Batteries, generators, diesel generators, solar panel, heck, even a liquid thorium reactor if you have one. Okay? Why not? Dan, did you bring it? No. You left it at home. Me too. So those are some of the things that we need to have. And the assumption I'm going to make, that we are in this room and that's all we have. So let's consider, what is it that I need to build? Whatever I build has to be secure. There is no exception to security. Unless, of course, there is really no choice. That's all you have. But you should know, oh, that's what I have. It's not that, oh, I did not know that it was not secure. It should be the other way around, right? And it must be usable by majority of people. Very important. There's no selective, yes, thank you, 5 minutes left. Not very much more. we want to be able to build this with tools that are generally available. Now, how many of you, just have a quick show of hands, how many of you have an Android-based cell phone in this room right now? Okay, let me put that down. How many of you don't have one? Oh, okay, then you can step out. Because the solution I'm proposing won't work for you. But that's okay, we'll fix it for you. We'll lend you our phones. So there should be little or no restrictions on who can use it and what hardware it should run on, and ideally it should cost no money. Ideally, okay? Sometimes you may have to pay, but that's fine. And there should be no single point of failure. Because again, the single point of failure for us now is connectivity to the outside. If this is in a Faraday cage, that's the single point of failure, the connectivity to the outside. Now, there are many entities that help make this happen. One of them is SARTS, Singapore Amateur Radio Transmitting Society, which is the local chapter for ham radio. The global chapter is called this American one. This is in the US, ARRL. The International IARU, they also have Amateur Radio Day, which happens every year in April. What is interesting is Singapore is one of those few countries that have got so few ham radio operators that every time somebody is able to connect or contact a Singapore ham radio operator, they struck gold. Because there are so few of us, which is kind of a sad thing. But I would highly encourage you to experiment and try. Okay, learn this particular trade, which is actually really phenomenal. And I wanted to mention a couple of projects because the earlier video that talked about the tsunami that happened in 2004, I happened to be involved with that tsunami search and rescue for Singapore Civil Defence. And I happened to be deployed as a reservist in Banda Aceh for 2 weeks. I was on the ground. What we had from SCDF point of view, we had radio satellite communication. So we could communicate back to HQ in Singapore, no problem. But what if the battery died? We are toast. What if there was no power supply to recharge the battery? We are toast. However, what was interesting was there was a bunch of ham radio operators from Indonesia that were walking around the place with their handsets that we could use. We fortunately did not have to use it, but at least we had a backup option. It was a backup of a backup that we used the Indonesian ham operators to connect back into Singapore. It didn't happen, but we had that as a backup. Very important. And then I noticed, I mentioned that because the Sahana project was a direct result of what happened in the 2004 tsunami, because a whole bunch of people had issues of being discovered, they were lost, and Sahana project was created by a bunch of guys in Sri Lanka to go discover and find people. So Sahana project is now an official UN project which is used for all kinds of disaster scenarios to track people and resources and all kinds of stuff. That brings me to Ushahidi as well, which is another project which again has got to do with emergency communication. This is using text messages. That's where it started in Kenya. When elections happened a few years ago, there was a lot of fighting between parties who claimed to have won and lost and so on. And that needed a lot of resolution, and they needed to get information. Information was flowing, so they used SMS, and this became an SMS gateway, which is also being used by the UN for emergency communication. Which brings me finally to this one that I wanted to do. I'm not sure how much time I have. It's called the Serval project. Let me see if I can, if you could ideally do this. Scan this QR code. This goes to Google Play, and you download the Serval project, which is actually an application that runs on your Android phone. Your Android phone does not have to be rooted. Now what happens here is, all you need to do is one of us in this group sets up as a hotspot. And you assign yourself any number. You can put your handphone number or any number as long as you're unique to everybody else in this room. And lo and behold, as soon as the connections are up, you find that we have a mesh here. We can have emergency communication independent of GSM, independent of any other Wi-Fi system, purely on a Wi-Fi using your cell phone. And you can now track this and make it as long as you want, as long as you have coverage and connectivity. And at some point, somebody may want to connect to the public internet and have a gateway, which is fine. But you actually now have a means to create an emergency network. Okay? So I ideally would love to have everybody to try it, but given the time constraint, I think I'll have to end there. Which is what you're supposed to build. And just a pitch for the Internet Society. Please consider joining us. Again, there's a QR code there. We try to help people understand what the Internet is and what you can do and how you can work around censorships, blockages, geolocking, and what have you, in a good way. With that, I thank you. I'll take questions if there are any. All right, any questions? One question. I had to rush through this a little, but is there any question? No questions? Great, thank you very much.